When the Sahara was, on a number of occasions during the Ice Age, incredibly fertile, it was a kind of environment that would have nurtured human civilization. And we really can't write off the possibility of a lost civilization until we take a much closer, much more detailed look at the Sahara. From long-lost civilizations who created some of the earliest forms of writing to ancient structures built by people who left behind no written record at all, making them a total mystery, these are some of the most incredible lost civilizations that were discovered in the desert. The Nabateans were an ancient civilization that lived in the deserts of what is now Jordan, Syria, Saudi Arabia, and Israel. They're probably most well known for creating the stunning city of Petra, which really has to be one of the coolest places on Earth. They were, as you can probably tell, really good at architecture. Petra, often called the Rose City, is carved into the sides of sandstone cliffs, and it's one of the most famous archaeological sites in the world for very good reason. They weren't just about building, though, they were also incredible at surviving in harsh desert conditions. They developed advanced water management systems like dams, cisterns, and channels to capture and store rainwater in the dry desert. This allowed them to live in a place that most other civilizations would have struggled to survive in. They were also skilled traders, controlling trade routes that connected Arabia, Egypt, and the Mediterranean. They traded spices, incense, and other goods, which made them incredibly wealthy. Their success was partly due to their ability to adapt to the desert environment and make use of its resources in smart ways. They didn't leave behind written records, but they did leave behind structures and tons of artwork that have helped us piece together what their culture was probably like. The ancestral Puebloans, also known as the Anasazi, were a Native American civilization that lived in the southwestern United States, mainly in what's now Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico. They're known for having built cliff dwellings and pueblos in the desert, especially in places like Mesa Verde and Chaco Canyon. Their homes were often carved right into the sides of cliffs, giving them protection from the harsh desert environment. They were also skilled architects and farmers. They lived in a dry desert but developed impressive irrigation systems to grow crops like corn, beans, and squash. They also built large multi-story buildings, creating entire communities that could house hundreds of people. Their most famous site, Chaco Canyon, was a major center for culture and trade. It had grand ceremonial structures, large plazas, and roads leading in all different directions, almost like an ancient highway system of the desert. The Puebloans were also known for their intricate pottery, woven textiles, and beautiful rock art. Their culture was deeply connected to the land, with religious ceremonies tied to the cycles of nature. But by the late 1200s, they mysteriously abandoned their cliff dwellings, and there's still some debate as to why. The Sumerians were one of the earliest known civilizations, and they lived in the deserts of Mesopotamia in what's now southern Iraq. They came about around 3500 BCE and are often credited with creating the first cities. The land they lived on was mostly dry and flat, but the Tigris and Euphrates rivers gave them the water they needed to survive. The Sumerians were also famous for developing one of the first writing systems, cuneiform. They used wedge-shaped marks on clay tablets to create everything from business transactions to religious stories. This allowed them to keep records and pass on knowledge across generations. They were also skilled builders, engineers, and farmers. They created irrigation systems to water their crops, which helped them turn the desert into fertile land. They also built impressive structures like ziggurats, which are these huge stepped pyramids that were used for religious ceremonies. Their cities, like Ur and Uruk, were bustling with activity, with markets, temples, and palaces. The Sumerians also made huge advances in math, science, and law. But then they disappeared, and their cities were buried under layers of sand until being rediscovered in the 19th century. The Hohokam were an ancient civilization that lived in the deserts of the American Southwest, mainly in what's now Arizona, from around 300 to 1500 CE. Now, the Hohokam, that's not what they were actually called, but that's what archaeologists have named them. They're best known for their canal systems. They took advantage of the little water they had, creating hundreds of miles of irrigation canals that helped them grow crops like corn, beans, and squash in the desert. These canals were so advanced that some of them are still visible to this day. They used the flow of water from rivers like the Salt River to channel water to their fields, and this allowed them to support large communities even in a desert where water is obviously scarce. They lived in large planned settlements with houses made of adobe and wood. They built platform mounds for religious ceremonies and were skilled in pottery, creating intricate designs that have been rediscovered by archaeologists. But like so many other civilizations on this list, the Hohokam mysteriously disappeared around 1500 CE.